Wild fermentation, the flavor, nutrition, and craft of live culture foods. Updated and revised edition by Sandor Katz. We're going to skip the prefaces and go straight to the introduction. Cultural context, the making of a fermentation fetish. This book is my song of praise and devotion to fermentation. For me, fermentation is part health regimen, part gourmet art, part practical food preservation, part multicultural adventure, part activism, even part spiritual path, as it affirms again and again the underlying interconnectedness of all. My daily routine is structured by the rhythms of these transformative life processes. Sometimes I feel like a mad scientist, tending to as many as a dozen different bubbly fermentation experiments at once. I sometimes feel like a game show host. Would you like to taste what's in crockpot number 1? Or trade it for what lies buried in crockpot number 2? Sometimes I feel like a holy roller evangelist, zealously spreading the word about the glorious healing powers of fermented foods. My friends tease me about my single-mindedness as they sample my fermented foods. One friend, Dashboard, even wrote a song about my obsession. Come on, friends, and lend me an ear. I'll explain the connection between wine and beer. And sourdough and yogurt, miso and kraut. They have in common what it's all about. Oh, the microorganisms. Oh, the microorganisms. Fermentation is everywhere. Always. It's an everyday miracle. The path of least resistance. Microscopic bacteria and fungi are in every breath we take and every bite we eat. Try as we may, and many do, to eradicate them with antibacterial soaps, antifungal creams, and antibiotic drugs. There is no escaping them. They are ubiquitous agents of transformation, feasting upon decaying matter, constantly shifting dynamic life forces from one miraculous and horrible creation to the next. Bacteria are essential to life's most basic processes. Organisms of every description rely upon them and other microorganisms to accomplish everyday aspects of self-maintenance and self-protection. We humans are in a symbiotic relationship with these single-cell life forms and could not possibly exist without them. This microbiota, as the trillion-cell collective entity of microbes associated with each of us is known, digests food into nutrients our bodies can absorb, synthesizes essential nutrients so we don't have to obtain them from food, protects us from potentially dangerous organisms, teaches our immune systems how to function, and regulates many of our physiological symptoms in ways that we're just beginning to recognize. Not only are we dependent upon microorganisms, we are their descendants. There is widespread agreement that all forms of life on Earth spring from bacterial origins. Microorganisms are our ancestors and our allies. They keep the soil fertile and are an indispensable part of the cycle of life. Without them, there could be no other life. Certain microorganisms can manifest extraordinary culinary transformations. Tiny beings, invisible to us, bring us compelling and varied flavors. Fermentation gives us many of our most basic staples, such as bread and cheese, and our most pleasurable treats, including chocolate, coffee, wine, and beer. Cultures around the globe enjoy countless exotic fermented delicacies. Fermentation is also used to make food more stable for storage and more digestible and nutritious. Live, unpasteurized, fermented foods carry beneficial probiotic bacteria directly into our digestive systems, where they can help to replenish and diversify our microbiota. In this book, I explain simple methods for making a variety of fermented foods and beverages. Over more than 2 decades, I've explored and experimented widely in the realm of fermentation. I want to share what I've learned. Truth be told, I'm more of a generalist than an expert. The experts find my techniques primitive, Because they are. Fermentation is easy. Anyone can do it. Anywhere. With the most basic tools. Humans have been fermenting longer than we've been writing words, making poetry, or cultivating the soil. Fermentation does not require state-of-the-art facilities, vast expertise, or laboratory conditions. You do not need to be a scientist, able to distinguish specific organisms or their enzymatic transformations, nor a technician maintaining sterile environments and exact temperatures. You can do it in your own kitchen using equipment you already have. The focus of this book is the basic processes of transformation, which mostly involve creating conditions in which naturally occurring wild organisms thrive and proliferate. Fermentation can be low-tech. These are ancient rituals that humans have been performing for many generations. They make me feel connected to the magic of the natural world and to our ancestors, whose clever observations enable us to enjoy the benefits of these transformations. When I try to conjure the origin of my fascination with this natural phenomenon, it leads me to my taste buds. I've always been crazy about brined sour pickles and sauerkraut. I am a descendant of Jewish immigrants from Poland, Russia, and Lithuania. These foods and their distinctive flavors are part of my cultural heritage. In Yiddish, the sour vegetables are known as zoyers. Sour flavors from fermentation are prominent in the food from Eastern Europe, as in many regions of the world, and carried over into distinctive culinary identity of New York City, where I grew up. We lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, 2 blocks from Zabar's, an icon of New York food, and my family regularly feasted on their zoyers. I recently learned that Lithuanian tradition worships Roguzis, a god of pickled food. Just a couple of generations out of Eastern Europe, and my taste buds still salivate at Roguzzi's temple. I started experiencing and thinking about the health benefits of bacterially rich foods when I was in my mid-20s, when dietary exploration led me to macrobiotics, a dietary movement with roots in simple Japanese Zen Buddhist cuisine that emphasizes regular consumption of miso, a live, unpasteurized sauerkraut, and other live pickles as an aid to digestion. I began to notice that every time I ate my beloved pickles or sauerkraut, I could feel my salivary glands squirt saliva, quite literally getting my digestive juices flowing. Unbeknownst to me, as I began regularly eating live culture ferments as a health practice, at some point I became HIV positive. I tested positive in 1991, long before effective medical treatments were available. I was seeking strategies for resilience and survival, and my nutrition became very important to me. Fermented foods made my body feel well nourished, and I became even more devoted to eating them regularly. I think it is imperative that I emphasize that fermented foods are not a cure for HIV or any other specific disease. They certainly may help with many varied conditions, and people tell me all the time about their successful treatment regimes, and that they included fermented foods and beverages. But how, in any single case, we can know whether it was fermented foods that made the difference, or a combination of factors? Who knows without controlled trials? Sadly, in our system, such trials are almost entirely profit-driven and just not being done for traditional foods and beverages. As for my own health, despite my hope that good living, including but not limited to fermented foods, would keep me healthy, I've lived through harrowing downward spirals as well as miraculous recoveries. I feel very lucky to be alive and relatively healthy. Awed by my body's recuperative powers, I take antiretroviral drugs every day. But many different factors, including regular consumption of live fermented foods, contribute to my present robust and relatively energetic state. Fermented foods can improve digestion, immune function, mental health, and possibly much more, contributing in important ways to overall health, even if they do not necessarily cure particular diseases. What drove me to finally start making sauerkraut for myself was not my health as much as the practical value of preserving the bounty of the garden. When I moved from New York City to rural Tennessee in 1993, I immediately got involved in keeping a garden. When the cabbage in our garden was ready for harvest that first year, I learned how to make sauerkraut. I found an old crock buried in our barn, chopped up the cabbage, salted it, and pounded it into the crock and waited. The first kraut tasted so alive and powerfully nutritious. Its sharp flavor sent my salivary glands into a frenzy and got me hooked on fermentation. I have made sauerkraut ever since, earning the nickname Sandor kraut, even as my repertoire expanded. After kraut, I learned how easy it was to make yogurt and cheese with a steady supply of fresh milk from our small herd of goats. And as I described earlier, sourdough baking, beer, and winemaking, and miso making followed. My experimentation has never really stopped. Bubbling crocks have become a permanent feature of my kitchen. Some of these projects are finished in a few hours, some take months or even years, and others are ongoing as I feed and stir crocks and jars, developing a symbiotic rhythm with these tiny fermenting organisms, nurturing them so they will nourish us. A fetish, according to Webster's, is anything supposed to possess magical powers, and thereby worthy of special devotion. Fermentation is magical and mystical, and I'm deeply devoted to it. I have indulged this arcane fetish and been indulged. This book is the result. Fermentation has an important journey of discovery for me, and I invite you to join me along this effervescent path, well trodden for thousands of years, yet largely forgotten in our time and place, bypassed by the superhighway of industrial food production.